I didn't see it coming. Despite my growing unease, I was still offering my services as a volunteer. I had lost faith in the connection but wanted to stay in their good books as the relationship deteriorated. I was scared. Scared of angering them further. Scared of being returned to the streets. Scared the remaining time I had to find a job and return home to Canada was fading quickly. Volunteering and participating in their programs were the best way to show willing, even if just to buy myself enough time to figure out a solution to my predicament. Besides, the free meal tickets were helpful, an enticing carrot to ensure my voluntary subservience no matter the circumstances. I did not want to lose them. I was still helping with their morning sign-in procedures when their client involvement coordinator, another lovely job title with another lovely salary, sat down for a casual chat to see how I was doing. She had been one of the driving forces behind my down-and-outlived participation, as well as the friend of the literary agent that had presented me with my lone, non-paying job proposition. With a cheerful, non-confrontational disposition, she often came down from the upstairs offices to engage in friendly chats with the clients. She was everybody's friend. Lava wouldn't melt in her mouth, let alone butter, and I was still stupid enough to trust her. She asked how I felt after turning down the opportunity they had arranged, as she was concerned I wasn't taking it well. I admitted to being disappointed, and hurt that it had been the only prospect that had surfaced. She admitted to disappointment as well, disappointed for me of course, she pointedly added, but reminded me I should be excited they had helped me discover my skill for writing. These continual reminders to credit them for discovering a talent I already knew I possessed were grating. They may as well have demanded praise for telling me I was 5'6", had blue eyes, and spoke with a Canadian accent. They weren't exactly leading me into exciting new territories of self-discovery. Still, it was her salary to earn. The chat then turned to the writing process itself. She found it fascinating and wanted to get inside the brain of a writer. I happily, stupidly, complied. I explained how I took a Jungian approach to my work, that I was nothing more than an overglorified pen, leaving myself open to the collective human unconscious that sometimes gives resonance to a piece if it is fortunate enough to connect to those basic human experiences and emotions that unite us all. It is a process of absorbing your experiences, processing them, letting them sink into your subconscious mind and marinate before even thinking about committing them to paper. I could have shut up. I should have shut up. But it is a topic I enjoy discussing, and I didn't shut up. The words kept flowing from my lips, providing bullets for the metaphorical gun my mouth was now aiming at my foot and preparing to fire. I described how it was comparable to an addiction, how on those rare occasions when the words flow without effort, the mental, emotional, and physical rush delivers a euphoria that can't be properly explained to those who have not been blessed with the experience. That 9 times out of 10 the words don't flow, and the frustration and anger and crumpled up sheets of paper thrown at the wall generally inspire a vow to never write again. But it's those rare times they do flow that keep you coming back to the words, keep you scribbling, keep you suffering the agonies of writing in the hope you will again recapture that elusive state of ecstasy. It's the ultimate high. Bang! I admitted that I had had so much to process since landing on the streets it was a bit overwhelming, an information overload. That the sheer volume of experiences in such a short period of time, good and bad, were almost too much to get my head around. That the intensity of the emotions, the fear, the pain, the uncertainty, the not knowing who to trust or believe was crushing at times. Caught up in the informality of the chat and my own narcissistic pleasure in discussing the applications of Jungian theory to my faux humble calling as a hack chronicler of the human experience, I jokingly confessed, "It's driving me nuts." Bang! Her eyes, that had glazed over during my loquacious meanderings, as most eyes do while loquaciously meander, suddenly lit up. Her excitement was glowing, her smile as blinding as headlights.
So you admit to having mental health issues? That's great.
I made a valiant, ultimately unsuccessful effort to backpedal, but I had been caught so off guard by her reaction, and unsure of the reason behind it, that I stammered self-defensive gibberish like a child caught with his hand in a cookie jar. I was talking about myself as a writer, not as a person, I tried to clarify. They're like 2 different people. Bang! I tried to explain that even though I felt overwhelmed at times, I had never been embarrassed to stay in touch with my emotions and wasn't afraid to take myself alone somewhere for a good cry. Bang! I was so rattled, the surge of adrenaline brought on the physical trembling that had already been misidentified as a sign of possible addiction inherited from my mother. Her eyes, alert after their shift from boredom to excitement, shifted again to overdramatic sympathy.
There's nothing to be ashamed of.
She cooed soothingly, as if talking to a simpleton.
A lot of writers have mental health issues. It's great you finally admitted it.
Her eyes shifted again to perky delight before suddenly remembering a meeting she had to attend. She picked up her notebooks and digital tablet and left, leaving me sitting there, jaw dropped to the floor, trying to figure out exactly what the hell had just happened. A couple of days later my caseworker sat me down to inform me the staff had held a meeting and come up with a solution to my problem. Recognizing yet another disturbing pattern, I asked why I wasn't present at these meetings, as I obviously had a vested interest. It was my future being discussed. As was proving the case with awkward questions, it was waved away without a proper answer. Too busy. Too complicated. You wouldn't understand. We have your best interest at heart. All interchangeable, all meaningless, but all imparting the same message. Ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies. He had more subtle lies to weave. At this meeting, the staff had decided to arrange an interview for me with an organization called Assisted Accommodation at their office in Wood Green. They had taken my concerns about my first viewing to heart, and my caseworker assured me this new residence would be nothing like the previous. It was staffed 24 hours, maintained high standards of cleanliness, and security was present to allay my safety concerns the connection knew were a high priority for me. I would be safe, I would be looked after, and I would get all the support I needed. There was, however, a catch, too, in fact. I had to admit I was not looking for work. And I had to allow them to help with my mental health issues. He was so soothing the sun wouldn't have melted in his mouth, let alone lava. And though he had strategically sugar-coated the specifics, I had a reasonably clear idea exactly what type of accommodation the staff had decided to place me in and refused immediately. I reiterated finding work was my #1 priority. I needed it not only to get back on my feet, but to begin making payments on my debt in Canada before I returned, and to continue those payments while I sought employment there. I was under the mistaken belief that because of my British citizenship I would be arrested on my return. It would be more than 2 years before I found out this would not have been the case. To this day I still kick myself for failing to apply one of the fundamental tenets of journalism to my personal situation: always double-check your facts with an independent source. Hindsight aside, his reply genuinely shocked me. He told me to stop worrying about the debt. It was only adding to my issues. I didn't have to pay it. He said the solution was to wait 7 or 10 years and the debt would automatically be cleared. I could then return with a clean slate. I was appalled at the suggestion in itself, but picked up on the one flaw in his strategy. I was not a Canadian citizen, merely a permanent resident. I had, at that point, only 9 months remaining before I lost the right to return. He told me I was being difficult just for the sake of being difficult. As is often the case with charity staff, he talked at me, not allowing a single opportunity for reaction. Not communicating so much as chanting words, the same words repeated ad nauseum over and over and over again. A wall of words, as effective as the proverbial wall of brick. Unyielding. Unbending, immovable. Through all my charity experiences I repeatedly found myself beating my head against a brick wall of words. He told me my main problem is I am too independent. It was admirable, but I needed to accept I could no longer look after myself. I shouldn't be working. I was sick. I needed help. I needed rest. It wasn't my fault. I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had already admitted I had problems just a few days ago, and it was time to take the next step. It was time to put myself in the hands of professionals. They would look after me. There was nothing to be afraid of. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Word after word after word, brick after brick after brick. The unfortunate truth is I was questioning my mental health and had been since my own words were quoted to me after the down-and-out performance. At that time, I wondered if I was starting to veer into paranoia and reading into the situation a little too much. Those suspicions had taken root in the back of my mind and were slowly spreading. I was tense. I was tired. My tremors were occurring with greater regularity, and I was starting to experience mild anxiety attacks. I was growing increasingly flustered and short-tempered. I attributed it to the stress of homelessness and increasing tensions with the connection, but was starting to consider the possibility that maybe there was more to it than that. Maybe they were right. Maybe there were underlying mental issues that were starting to assert themselves. My situation should have been a quick fix: find work and get back on my feet. The staff at the connection had stated that themselves when I first signed in, with the oft-repeated caveat there are no guarantees. But over 2 months later that fix was further out of my reach than it had been at the start. Maybe the tensions with staff were the result of misinterpretations on my part. Maybe I was more confused than I thought. Maybe it was me. But I still didn't think these potential issues were severe enough to warrant the kind of arrangement I suspected was being proposed. I still believed I was functional. And I still believed finding work was the solution and I would be fine once I was back on my feet again. I was filled with growing doubt, but I remained firm and rejected his proposed solution again. His smile remained, but his tone shifted considerably.
I don't think you understand. I'm not telling you you don't have a choice, but you don't have much of a choice.
If I didn't give this serious consideration, I could no longer stay at the connection. I needed to admit I needed help, or they couldn't help me. They weren't forcing me to do anything, it was my choice to make. He was just telling me the choices that were available. It was a hell of a nudge, and that was the moment my sardonic disdain for these people turned to outright fear. I was presented a choice that wasn't really a choice, backed up by a threat that wasn't really a threat. Knowingly make a fraudulent claim about my health and lie about my ability to return to work full-time or return to the streets without being allowed access to the help the connection or the government provides. I had no choice but to go with the nudge. He accompanied me on that first interview with assisted accommodation to be supportive and to help with some of the more difficult questions. We arrived early, and as we stepped out of the transit station in Wood Green, he announced, "Welcome to your new home," and walked me through the area, pointing out all the benefits it had to offer: a library, a movie theater, a shopping precinct, a supermarket, a bookstore. All the time making reference to this being my new home, my new start. I was quietly terrified, and my tremors slowly resurfaced, reminding us both of their presence. They continued throughout the interview itself and highlighted by my caseworker as proof of my mental disorders. I remained surprisingly detached throughout the whole process, resigned to the fate I suspected the connection had arranged. I saw no way out and spent most of the consultation sullen and withdrawn, nodding or providing monosyllabic agreement to my caseworker's assertions when prompted. I initially tried to catch the interviewer's attention to give him some kind of indication this was wrong, to try to indicate I wanted to speak to him alone, but quickly abandoned those efforts when I realized my subtle signals and gesturing eyes probably weren't helping my efforts to defend my mental state. The meeting came to a conclusion and I was assured I had done very well. It was a brave step I was taking. The staff at assisted accommodation would review my case with the staff of the connection, and if successful I would be invited back for a second interview. They were confident I would be back. As we left the building, my caseworker congratulated me and told me how proud he was. I was finally learning. We conducted another tour of Wood Green so I could see my new home again and appreciate how lovely it was. He even bought me a coffee, stressing he was paying out of his own pocket. In all honesty, I was relieved. The wait bought me time, and the pressure at the connection abated considerably. I made the best use of that period to make alternative arrangements before the second interview came to pass. I contacted Crisis, Shelter, and St. Mungo's again by email to ask their assistance. As with my first attempts when I initially found myself homeless, those emails went unanswered. I also took steps to file complaints with the Charity Commission, the Mayor of London's office, and Citizens Advice Bureaus. Again, no response. The waiting time quickly ended and the day of the second interview came to pass. I was provided with a one-way public transit ticket and sent on my way like a child being sent to his first day of school. To my delight, I was unaccompanied. I arrived with guns blazing. Loud, angry, and foul-mouthed, I came closer to firing a fatal shot into my foot than I was aware. For as I soon discovered, there is no second interview. It was moving in day. The second interview is simply a small and understandable ruse to guide clients into their new living arrangements, where the staff were prepared should those clients prove uncooperative. This was more than the pastoral shelter my caseworker had painted. This was strict accommodation for people with serious addiction or mental health issues, who require 24-hour monitoring, who are often incapable of cooking or cleaning up after themselves without supervision, who need strict rules and regulations. My histrionic curse-laden grand entrance did nothing to disprove my candidacy for such accommodation. I was gently steered into a small room and provided a seat. I was offered a glass of water which I gladly accepted. It wasn't until the door closed behind me and I heard the click of the lock that I thought, oh. But something I said in my rambling tirade must have struck the right note. After a few minutes, a representative of assisted accommodation brought me a glass of water and sat at the table across from me, no notebook, no tablet, no paperwork. He asked if I was feeling better, and when I replied in the affirmative, asked me to start at the beginning and tell him everything. To take all the time I needed and not to worry if I grew upset in the telling. He would be upset too in my position. I scanned his face for the ubiquitous stone-cold smile, but it wasn't there. He looked genuinely attentive. So I started at the beginning, and over the next half hour told him everything. He was appalled, but not surprised, angry, but sympathetic. With frank honesty, he admitted homeless charities often abuse their services in this way. It is a serious issue that prevents people who genuinely need their support from getting it, and often encourages people to make fraudulent claims to receive the money from mental health benefits that living in their accommodation requires. It was plainly obvious to him I did not qualify, and I was more than capable of taking employment. He promised to file a complaint against the connection, and though he couldn't do much to help in my current situation, told me to hang in there. He asked me to let him know when I was back on my feet. I have yet to contact him. I dodged a bullet that day. More than one if you factor my gun-toting mouth into the equation. Unfortunately, though it had temporarily run out of ammunition, my mouth wasn't finished quite yet. It rarely is.